Interview with an activist for ODEC. How I met the guy. I met this guy on a flight from Liberia to Brussels. Since I am a citizen journalist and generally curious, I began talking to the guy next to me who had an interesting look on his face. We swapped stories. Although we both have very interesting stories that most people can barely believe, the one below was the most interesting one to me. Although we spoke much more about it than what I have written below, this is the gist of it. I thought he had a good idea. I wonder what would have happened had he succeeded. You decide. What is your background?
I grew up on a farm in the backcountry. Although my parents never went to school beyond 13 years old, they were very smart and read books all of the time. It is actually how they met. They were both the village outcasts. This meant that I was able to get out of the backcountry and study abroad, which is not really that far because the countries were all occupied by the Soviet Union. I worked my way around the world and learned much about worldly reality and worldly fiction. My university experience helped me understand and interpret my environment without determining it. You know what I mean? I did not do anything special, but there are not many people who have done what I have done. Those of us who have lived this life share the same experience, nevertheless. This is the interpretation that differentiates us.
Why were you arrested?
That depends on who you ask. This was my final warning. I'm lucky that they did not just kill me. I could have just been murdered, or I could have had an accident far from the doctor's care. That's how they arranged things. Anyway, I was arrested for attempted diamond trafficking and everything that goes along with that.
What is your side of the story?
You remember the story about OPEC? Most people are not aware of it, but some of the oil exporting countries banded together so that they could control the petroleum markets to their advantage. There are a few groups competing for wealth, power, and control. I'm getting ahead of the story. In 2000, I met some researchers on a flight in Africa. They had just published The Heart of the Matter, Sierra Leone Diamonds and Human Security. Basically, it was the story of how the diamond market is controlled from Europe, Canada, and Africa. It seemed to me that it was just another story of a white man controlling a resource over a black man. I was fascinated by the report and laughed at how ignorant I was in the face of the factual depiction of market manipulation. I was also surprised that the Africans controlling the diamonds would accept the slavers' continued domination in their economic affairs. Little did I know at that time that this too was an ignorant thought in and of itself. I was still a victim of my former learning. Anyway, this all got me thinking about how the Africans should control the wealth that it possesses and not the Europeans. It seemed to me that if the Africans cooperated together to form their own cartel, they could dictate the terms to the Europeans and end their continued subservience to the slavery empires. I called it ODEC in my mind, the Organization for Diamond Exporting Countries. I decided that I would venture to Angola, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and the Ivory Coast in an attempt to garner support for this idea while lending my so-called expertise in the endeavor. I really thought it was a good idea. Now I laugh at the idea of my former self. Smillie, I think it was him, was arrested while on a flight in Africa. His report got him arrested just like it did me, but in a completely different manner. In retrospect, that is not why they bother arresting us, since no one really cares about the report content. Sure, the Kimberley process circus was launched due to the Blood Diamonds campaign. That does not really get to the heart of the matter. Well, in actuality, the arrest is a tool of fear to scare us and demonstrate to us that we can be killed for our efforts, but shall be spared by the cage. As I flew around Africa and had meetings with warlords, the word got out about my activities in my ODEC project. I was being followed, harassed, and had many strange conversations with random Europeans about diamonds and conflicts. People were trying to warn me subtly, and I did not really care. Maybe I really did not realize it. I was not scared enough at that time.
How were you able to meet with warlords in conflict zones?
Actually, it's much easier than I thought it would be. I had to hang out and party with a lot of people, and I had to pay off a lot of people. Once I made it through the cultural hoops, I eventually began to meet my way up the authority ladder. Were you scared? Sure, a few times. I was very nervous many times and wondered if I was being stupid. I also wondered if I were ever going to meet anyone with decision-making power. It was difficult to recognize if I was just being farmed for my money and time, or figuring out that I was failing in my endeavor. However, once I had the first meetings with some generals, they all called themselves generals, they all began to vouch for me. Arranging the meetings was much easier afterward. You know, those guys all have satellite telephones and very extensive address books. You'd be surprised, I was. This idea of some bush rebels fighting for independence is not very accurate in some cases. They're more like the militarized salespersons for the department store owners.
How did the generals react to your proposal?
The short answer is that they said they had everything they wanted already. They said that I was like the humanitarian aid workers who come to Africa with all their ideas and everything.
Were they correct?
In a way, they were right. I obviously had different motivations than the aid workers, but the argument made sense to me. It was the beginning of my education by warlords. Little did I know how my worldview was going to change.
What do you mean by that?
I began my ODEC project with the objective to revolutionize the diamond industry. I do not mean that I wanted to clean up the dirty business. What I wanted to do was to flip the power structure on its head and liberate the slaves from the masters. That was my idea of making the world a better place and rectifying a historical and continuing injustice. What I discovered is classic. Those in power reap the rewards while the workers suffer. Middle management is satisfactorily rewarded for suppressing the working class. Upper management is satisfied with their organizational target. And finally, the external social activist is effectively neutralized by all the parties involved. Not everyone wants to be saved. Some plans fail if not implemented at the right time, in the right place, with the right persons. This is what I learned. The final lesson was my arrest.
Why? What happened?
I thought that my foolhardy adventure was over, and was considering all that I had experienced and learned. Spent a few days relaxing and thinking before I chose my next destination. I decided to return home to spend time with familiar faces and familiar culture. I believed that I could regain a powerful sense of security by returning to my roots. Once I arrived at the airport, I was arrested. I was taken to an isolated holding chamber and periodically interrogated. No one harmed me, and I was not mistreated. After I passed through my initial phase of fear, I realized that the general's lesson was incomplete. I began to understand the arrest as a final communicator. My captors permitted me to leave unharmed and with my dignity. My personal reaction to the imprisonment would be of my own construction.
And what have you constructed?
I do not know yet. I'm still working on it.
What are you going to do now?
I'm not sure. I still have to analyze this experience and place it somewhere in my psyche. Only thereafter will I be able to choose what to do next.
Are you glad that you tried to create ODEC? Would you do it again now that you have accumulated new experiences? I mean, will the result be different if you attempted it again while being able to draw upon your new experiences?
I'm glad that I am safe and was not harmed. I'm glad that I tried to do something I thought would make a difference. And no, I would not try something like this again now that I've had this experience. If I were to embark on a similar project, I would only do so as an employee of someone else's power. The world can be a dirty place, and I am not a dirty enough player. I know that about myself.
Concluding remarks. I have no idea where this guy is now or what he is doing, but I hope he has found some peace. I've met many people like him in the field. They are the real idealists who are affected traumatically by the Machiavellian content of the world. Most of the people you think are idealists are not real idealists to the full. They are merely people performing what seems to be an idealistic act. Perhaps they have reasons for performing their idealistic act, but they are truly superficial once you delve into their character. If you want to read the report that motivated this guy, here is the citation in one place on the net you can read it. It was written by Smillie, Lansana, Gberie, and Ralph Hazleton. The Heart of the Matter, Sierra Leone Diamonds and Human Security. It's for free on the